Summertime's not normally a good time for TV, but Showtime's got some of the coolest shows. Ray Donovan, music supervised by Thomas Golubic, and True Blood, music supervised by Gary Calamar, both of whom have partnered up in the past on many shows and now are doing great work on their own. We'll have both of them on the show in the next couple weeks, and we'll even get to hear Gary Calamar perform some new music from his new EP. Watch out on Q-Score. Jon Burlingame is one of the nation's leading writers on the subject of music for film and television. He writes regularly for Variety and teaches film music history at USC. He's just written his fourth book, The Music of James Bond, and his last one before that, For the Record, covered the rise of political activism in music. Jon has written for esteemed publications like The New Yorker, New York Times, Premiere Magazine, and many more. And most recently, the host of the amazing Emmy-produced Score event, which I talked about, where Music Supervisor Guild sponsored, and featured the top composers doing their best work on the live stage. A true film and music renaissance man. Say hi to Jon Burlingame.
Jonathan.
Thanks for coming in. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, man.
So, obviously we'll get into the book situation, but I'm always curious, you know, talking to the audience always wants to know, like, how did you get started in the game? What was your big break to get you kind of up there?
Well, I've been a journalist since 1973, and my first few years in the business were covering hard news. But by the mid-1980s, I found myself gravitating to writing about entertainment. But when I came out here to Los Angeles in the late 80s, I found that no one was really covering the arena of music for films and TV. And so I kind of made that my special niche, and I started writing about it for the Hollywood Reporter and the LA Times, and eventually some of the other publications you mentioned, and I've been doing it for Variety now since 1997.
Right, that was my first memory of you reading a byline of you reviewing something. So traditional media obviously is thrown on its head with the internet, and which is where we live. How has that changed for you, journalism changed for you? How has the internet changed it in your world as far as what you do?
I think it's still in transition. I think we still don't really know where it's all going to go. For those of us who started in print in the 1970s, it's a bit of a topsy-turvy world because print is very much on the decline now. And so for a freelancer like me, it's a little harder to actually make a living because there are fewer people actually paying for solid professional journalism. The blogosphere has really kind of taken over. So I'm trying to move in new directions myself, and I think that everybody is still sort of trying to figure it out to this point.
Do you have your own blog?
Not yet, but I will this fall.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to launch it right here. Jon Burlingame. He's going to start a blog, and we're going to keep up on him. And this will be his first piece that he posts from Q-Score.
Right.
So tell us about teaching. Tell us about that world in USC. It's it's one of the top music business programs in the country. How long have you been there, and what's it like doing it?
I started in 1995. The scoring program, the Scoring for Motion Pictures and Television program at USC, is one of the most prestigious places for young composers to learn how to write music for movies and television. So they wanted somebody who knew a little bit about the history of movie music to come in and tell these young composers what had gone before in the field. So not knowing anything really about how to teach or how to go about it, I sort of just dove in. And it's become one of the most satisfying parts of my career, is introducing young composers to the classic scores and the classic movies, really, of the last 70 years.
And you get to work with my friend Dan Carlin at all?
As a matter of fact, yes, Dan is currently my boss. He's running.
Is that right? He's a good boss to have.
Yeah, he's great. Now he took over the scoring program at USC 2 years ago.
Yeah. And
he's doing a great job.
Good. He's a wonderful guy.
Yeah.
So this book, James Bond, The Music of James Bond. I was literally just thinking I'd just glean enough information out of it. But being a historian and love music, the fact is just fascinating. Between the theme songs and the history of John Barry, who scored 11 films. I also had a connection because my first job in the business was working for Harry Saltzman's son, Stephen. What's up, Stephen? Who was the partner with Cubby Broccoli in the film. So tell me about your fascination with this and how you got involved with writing this book.
Well, I'd gotten to know John Barry over the years. Starting in the late 1980s, I had interviewed him often, and we became very friendly. And whenever I had the opportunity to write about John, whether it was for a book or a newspaper piece, I did. And as I said, we became very friendly, and I was not only friendly with him, but a great fan of his. I mean, scores beyond the Bonds, like Midnight Cowboy and The Lion in Winter, and out of Africa, all those great scores. And yet, a couple of bios had already been written about Jon Barry during his lifetime.
Biographies.
Yes, and during his lifetime, and I thought, well, that's kind of covered. But then, in early 2011, Jon Barry died, and I began to revisit his music and fell in love with it really all over again. And a friend of mine who was consulting for Oxford University Press had asked me what I thought about the idea some time ago about doing a book on the history of the Bond scores. And I'd originally said no, because it seemed like it was a very deep subject and would require a lot of time and effort. And I knew that Jon Barry's own memory was sort of failing in the early 2000s, and I thought, well, maybe not. But when Jon died in 2011, I came back to the idea and I thought, what a great way to pay homage to this great composer, this great man. But also, the broader aspect of the Bond scores had never really been touched. There are a million books about the James Bond movies, but nobody had ever really pursued in depth the idea of how did the songs come about? How did the scores come about? What went into all of this? What kind of behind-the-scenes tales were there? So I tackled it.
Yeah, like Marvin Hamlish talking about how he delivered a #2 record, Academy Award nominated or winning
Academy Award nominated
song. The first time it had ever been a Bond theme, correct? Had ever been nominated, I believe.
First time the score had been nominated.
Right.
Actually, the second time that a theme had been.
Right, and then he only doesn't get asked back for the next one. And so, you know, it's a classic tale of what it takes, the politics of composing and getting it right for the producers. And you also had two different producers at two different takes. Harry Saltzman didn't quite get the contemporary music. There's a great piece in there about talking about, you know, they bring Paul McCartney to the table. Paul McCartney does a demo for, or does a track, does the theme song for Live and Let Die, right? And they bring it to Harry Saltzman. He's like, well, who should we get to sing this? And the guy's like, no, it's Paul McCartney. It's a good thing. Like stuff like that.
It's one of my favorite stories.
Oh, it's amazing. So yeah, I mean the reviews have been great. You're getting quotes like exhaustively researched and consistently fascinating from Total Film, snappy, efficient, and gossip heavy. The Washington Post. No previous book has tackled the music of Bond in such depth and variety. Your friends at Variety, depth and detail. So again, let's talk about Jon Barry, because he really is the spine of the book. He scored 11 of these films, and he literally came from co-writing the theme at the beginning, which is a contentious. Let's start with that.
We do need to be careful about this.
Let's talk about the theme, and because it is one of the most iconic themes of all time.
Exactly.
So let's talk about your take on.
So what happened on the first James Bond film, which was Dr. No in 1962, was Broccoli and Saltzman brought in a London songwriter named Monty Norman. And he went down to Jamaica and actually hung around during the shooting and started to write some early songs some of which are actually in the movie.
Right.
And so he comes back to London, and he's struggling with the idea of the underscore that's necessary, where he needs to somehow musically depict this tough secret agent. And he's having some trouble writing a theme. He pulls an old song out of a trunk from an unproduced musical, and he starts to fool around with that. But at the same time, the filmmakers, particularly editor Peter Hunt, knew that they needed a piece which was really kind of dynamic. Not only to just play over the main title, but maybe to get on the radio. So they put Monty Norman, the songwriter, and young Jon Barry, the successful rock and roll artist who'd had a number of hits with his instrumental group, the Jon Barry Seven, in England, put them together. And Barry worked with Monty's tune and modified it, orchestrated it, arranged it, gave it a brand new sound. And that's the James Bond theme that we know today, which is the twangy guitar, the sort of dark atmosphere of the bass line, the sort of bebop, jazzy midsection. That's all what Jon Barry brought to the table on the Bond theme.
And they ended up sharing the publishing on it?
No. The deal for Jon Barry was, you take this tune and turn it into something that we can get on the radio, and we'll give you £250, and first shot on the next score. So Barry agreed to that. And to this day, Monty Norman has sole credit on the James Bond theme. And to his credit, acknowledges that without John Barry's arrangement and record success, it would never have gone as far as it has.
But Monty is a yin and a yang. He never got asked to score another Bond film, but
That's
he
right.
made a tremendous amount of money from this theme.
Apparently, as happened in a lawsuit that reached London's High Court in 2001, the testimony there indicated that he was making in excess of hundreds of thousands of pounds per year
Right.
as the composer of the Bond theme.
So also another interesting thing about Dr. No that I found out from the book was that Chris Blackwell, who founded Island Records and brought us people like Bob Marley and Jimmy Cliff and U2 and Grace Jones and, you know, you name it, one of the greatest musical figures of all time, was hired as a location scout and would take these guys out to these dingy little Kingston clubs and found a number of musicians who ended up performing in the film and creating the songs with Monty, right?
That's right, exactly. And Blackwell's role in the Bond films is barely known about, and yet without his involvement, a great deal of the sound of Dr. No would not have existed.
Right. And also, didn't he buy Ian Fleming's place?
Yes, I think he did.
Yeah,
That's
so
right.
he turned GoldenEye into a luxury resort, which to this day can be rented and is one of the finest resorts in Jamaica. So what are some of your favorite stories to come out of the book, some of the stuff researched besides the Dr. No stuff?
One of my favorite stories is the Thunderball saga, where at the beginning of 1965, having had this huge success with the Goldfinger single, John Barry decides to branch out a little bit. And so nobody wanted a song called Thunderball, he thought. So he had been amused by the fact that he'd read somewhere in a newspaper that the Italians called James Bond Mr. Kiss Kiss Bang
right.
Bang.
That's right.
So he decided to write a song about that, a song about Bond called Mr. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. And he recruited his pal, the lyricist Leslie Bricusse, and they wrote this great song. So he bases the entire underscore on this tune. And then at the last minute, during the recording of the score, United Artists decided they don't want a song called Mr. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. They want a song called Thunderball. All of a sudden, the Dionne Warwick recording of Mr. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is tossed. He and Don Black basically have a weekend to write a brand new song called Thunderball, and they quick get Tom Jones to come in and sing it. But they decide they like the song so much they'll put it over the end titles. So they bring in Shirley Bassey, who'd had a big hit with Goldfinger. She now sings Mr. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. But it too gets shelved at the last minute. She decides to sue. So Shirley Bassey, this is one of the things I'm proud of in the book because nobody had ever written about this before.
Yeah, I thought that was fascinating.
She actually sued the producers saying, if you don't reinstate my vocal, I'm going to have distribution of this film stopped. Well, that never actually
That quite
came.
didn't work that
No,
way.
that didn't work
And the
out.
fact that she was actually asked back again after suing them is pretty impressive.
Exactly.
And she did two
Diamonds
more,
Are Forever.
She did 2 more runs at
Exactly.
it, right?
And
Diamond-
Moonraker.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and let's talk about some of the Renegade James Bond pieces, because I know that, you know, there were the Casino Royale was one of them.
Right, in 67.
Right, and then there was another one that was a follow-up to that, right?
Never Say Never Again,
Never Say Never
which
Again.
came out in 83.
So how did that end up happening that they were able to, I guess people had the rights for a script?
That's right. In the case of Casino Royale, Broccoli and Saltzman had the rights to all of the Bond books except for the first one, Casino Royale.
Right.
Those rights had actually passed on to the producer Charles Feldman. And so that's how the 67 Casino Royale came about, and that has a great score by Burt Bacharach.
Right.
And of course,
Burt only scored 1 also, right?
that's right.
Yeah, he was never asked back again.
No, well, but it's the unofficial Bond film.
Oh, so
you
he was
know.
never going to. He was
No,
never going to.
He was never going to get in the other.
Right.
But he and Hal David turned out The Look of Love
That's right.
for the Casino Royale film. And then in 83, you have Never Say Never Again, which is essentially a remake of Thunderball. That, again, is a rights issue where one of the producers, Kevin McClory on Thunderball, had the rights to remake the movie. Right. That's what became Never Say Never Again when Sean Connery actually was lured back
That's right.
by a lot of money to
And he actually donated the money, right? Donated the money to a Scottish fund or something like that?
That's actually Diamonds Are Forever.
Diamonds Are Forever.
Yeah, exactly. But when he did Never Say Never Again, that again is an unofficial Bond film scored by Michel Legrand.
Right.
You know, the great French
there's
composer.
just amazing stories in there about the collaborations. Why I love it is, it has your basic straight score stuff, and the way you also wrote the more in-depth aspect of where the score lined up in the picture. So if you actually went back, which I'm going to do now, and watch these films, because I haven't seen them in a long time, and you could see, okay, at this minute mark in the film, this score is here, and it was created there. I mean, for anybody that loves film scoring and loves these classic films, you can learn so much about it. Going to the present, obviously Adele, right? They picked the hot hand, right? And she murdered it.
Yeah,
it's that record comes on the radio, you're like, oh shit, that's a great record.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's just,
the last few movies, of course, the history of the Bonds, which sort of starts at United Artists and was there for a long time, but the complexities of film production, eventually it went to MGM UA, and now it's basically controlled by Sony. The head of music over at Sony is a great lady named Leah Volek.
Yep.
And she has had a lot of input in how these things have come about. It was her idea, for example, to find Chris Cornell to do the hard-edged song, You Know My Name, for Casino Royale. Mm-hmm. But then when it came to do when it came around to the 50th anniversary of the Bond franchise in 2012, the film was going to be Skyfall. And she thought, well, we should have a song that harkens back to the history, the early history of Bond, when Shirley Bassey was Queen, but also needs to be contemporary with an artist that speaks to today's audiences. And so Adele's name came up immediately, and she was successfully wooed to do the song.
And did her team produce it?
Yes,
I think so, right?
Paul Epworth, her writer and producer.
He does a great job.
Yeah. And the two of them really collaborated.
And that won a Grammy, I believe.
And it won the Academy Award.
And it won the Academy Award.
The first Bond theme to ever win an Oscar.
After 50 years.
After 50 years.
On its 50th, how many editions of Bond movies would that be before it actually won the Oscar?
Well, it's the 23rd. Skyfall was the 23rd official Bond film, and then there have been two unofficial.
So 25 films.
And John Barry was never even nominated for any of those classic songs.
Wow.
Goldfinger, Thunderball, You Only Live Twice.
Right, because the Bond stuff was always viewed as kind of like, the Academy Awards had a whole different vibe. It was a little bit too cheesy, a little bit too corny.
Right.
For the Academy Awards. So the Academy Awards have also morphed and grown up a little bit to, and let comedies into their world and things like that.
And to embrace a little bit more contemporary music as the time has gone on.
And what of all the films is your favorite Bond film?
Oh, that's very tough to say. I spent a year on this book, and
and you watched, I'm sure, over and over again, right?
Yeah, and my wife was ready to kill me.
I'm sure. She had enough Bond in the house.
Well, I mean, I didn't listen to anything but Bond music for 8 months. But I'm very fond of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which of course,
George Lazenby,
which is the one 60s movie that Connery didn't do.
Right.
And yet it's a great film with a great leading lady and Diana Rigg.
Right.
And a really edgy John Barry score which incorporated Moog synthesizer.
Right, that was when the synthesizer started to pop off.
Exactly.
British progressive rock was kicking it, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And what's next for the Bond franchise? Do we know what's coming up next?
Well, they haven't named the new film, but it will star Daniel Craig, and supposedly pre-production is going on now. And because it's being directed by Sam Mendes, who directed the last Bond film, Skyfall, which was so hugely successful, they asked Mendes back. So the betting is that composer Tom Newman, who was the composer on Skyfall, will probably be back to do the next one.
So David
but
Arnold
we don't know that.
did about 4. How many did he do? He did 5.
He did 5.
He did 5. And he got knocked out by...
Well, I mean...
Sam Mendes has his guy?
Exactly.
Which is a very, the concept of composers and directors having relationships, and the director can basically get their guy in there if he's, of that stature, so to speak.
Yeah, that's right. And producer, let's face it, Barbara Broccoli and Michael Wilson, who are the current producers,
are husband and wife, aren't they?
No, they're actually sister and
brother.
And stepbrother.
Yes, exactly.
But they're very smart people.
Right.
And it is the family business, so they know how to run their business.
Yeah.
And when it comes to inviting a very high-profile director, you're going to let him choose his people to make the film. And that's how Tom Newman got involved with Skyfall. But yes, David Arnold did the previous 5 films. And he was a great choice because he was the perfect follow-up to the classic John Barry sound, which he'd appreciated. But he also brought a much more contemporary vibe, I think, to the score.
You should also check out the record that he did, which was kind of the Bond shaken and stirred themes, interestingly done, and that really ingratiated him well into that camp, showing the historian nature of his work.
That's right.
But fascinating book. I highly recommend it. Music of James Bond, written by Jon Burlingame. And I really appreciate you coming in and talking with us.
Thank you so much,
Thanks
Jonathan.
so much.
Okay.
We'll see you next time on Q-Score. Peace out. For more Q-Score, please check us out at emPOWERme.tv to find out what goes on behind the curtain and how the film and TV music gets made. It happens right here. Tune in.